So my presentation is called Image is Everything, and my advisor is Professor Dino Christensen in the Political Science Department. And yes, that is Vice President Biden. Isn't that cool? So, okay, anyway. So a little bit of background. Candidate portrayal is extremely important in a successful political campaign or any campaign in general, not just politics. So a lot of research has been done regarding the likability, how trustworthy a candidate is, how capable people perceive that candidate. And so a lot of research has been done on the candidate themselves. So an attractive candidate in general is going to do much better than an unattractive one. Sorry, it's true. That said, it's not really going to sway a particular election if someone is overwhelmingly more competent than the other candidate. But little research has been done and to find out what type of photograph settings are the most persuasive or the most liked by individuals voting. So my research question is what types of images of candidates are the most preferred by voters? And the settings that I chose were interacting with constituents, hunting, a candidate with their family, a candidate shown working, doing some community service work, and then with a puppy, because who doesn't love puppies? And who doesn't love Dick Cheney holding a gun? So the theory behind this is that the depiction of a candidate that voters can best identify with is the image that has the greatest effect on persuasion or preference. So something that individuals do a lot every day or as part of their life. So if they play sports and they see a picture of President Obama playing basketball, or if they are really against smoking and they see President Obama smoking, they might penalize him for that, or they might think a little bit less of him seeing an image like that. So what people can relate to and what people can relate with is really what they are going to prefer seeing candidates doing, as opposed to doing things that aren't really relatable to them at all. So everyone eats ice cream, I hope, so they can really relate to that picture. Something that may not be quite as relatable, however, is a very symmetrical, perfect-looking family. Not to name any names, Mitt Romney. Okay, so the survey design that I created was to first ask some background questions of the individuals taking the survey, who are my voters, followed by a little bit of information about this candidate. It was not a real candidate. It was someone who I chose who is from an election they did not win, unfortunately, in South Carolina, so no one knows who they are. Next, and I just saw that these renumbered, so that should not be 1 and 2, but following the candidate information is the image shown of the candidate. And then following that were some follow-up questions to find out what type of effect that image had on their kind of impression of that particular candidate. So these were the background questions, and they were very basic. So I wanted to find out the gender of the particular candidate, or of the survey respondent, what their marital status was, if they had children, how educated they were, which party they identified with, their employment status, their income, and how old they are. So all of these things I thought were going to play a very important role in how they evaluate different images of candidates. So if you are a female, do you prefer to see a candidate sitting with their family, or does that not matter to you? Or is it equal for both males and females? If you're married, do you penalize a candidate when you see them with their family? If you don't have children, do you maybe not care as much if a candidate likes puppies? If you are more educated, would you really not like seeing a candidate that's shown hunting? There's a lot of kind of combinations of these background questions with the images that we can really look at to see what types of images are preferred and why. So I did contextualize the candidates a little bit just to give some background so that they weren't just shown the images. For the Republican candidate, it was not explicitly stated that he was Republican, but based on these 3 points that I presented with the individuals taking the survey, it was pretty implied. He supported lowering taxes, he supported the war in Iraq, and he's against abortion. And for the Democrat, he supported increasing the minimum wage, opposed the war in Iraq, and supported a woman's right to choose. So the way the survey worked is that the individuals taking the survey were shown these brief little points about the candidate. His name was John. And then they were shown the image following seeing those. So some people saw the positions that he was a Republican. Some saw that he was a Democrat. So the purpose of this was to see if some people would penalize certain candidates for their party and not what they were shown doing. So if a Republican was shown hunting, was he penalized more than a Democrat shown hunting? So the images were shown with the following question. On a feeling thermometer from 1 to 100, with 1 being least favorable and 100 being the most favorable, how did they rate this image? And then following that, I wanted to see how that image affected their trustworthiness, likability, job proficiency, and conscientiousness. So this was definitely a tough rating, I think, for people taking the survey to really kind of get at how conscientious they think the candidate was. But I really wanted to be able to see if there were mainly particular penalties that were given toward certain candidates for certain types of images. So first, the first image was a candidate with constituents. The candidate is pictured on the right. And so I wanted to do a little bit, just for the results today, the results that I'll be showing you are what I showed, or what I looked at when candidates were, when the respondents were looking at age. So the older a respondent was, the more favorable they thought this image was. And I wanted to show this because I thought it was really interesting, because I think that as people get older, they really appreciate that face-to-face interaction. So younger students or younger voters are going to be interacting with candidates on a much more impersonal level through social media, through Facebook, Twitter, things like that. But someone who's a little bit older really appreciates that face-to-face interaction. And so obviously there are fewer respondents as it gets older, so that's also part of this. But it definitely is interesting to see that more people were shown that way. So the second image is hunting. He's, again, the candidate on the right. This one, I would obviously wanted to see how different parties view this. So if a particular respondent was a Democrat or Republican, how they viewed this. The results I thought were really surprising, because it was actually the opposite of what I anticipated. So as the scale gets higher, that's actually more conservative voters penalizing the candidate for how they viewed them in that image. So more conservative candidates did not actually like the hunting photo. So really interesting. So this is his family picture. And so what I looked at to see how people scored that was their marital status. And so as you can see, there's very little variability here, whether someone is not married or they are married, but there is a slight upward trend, or well, downward. So if they are not married or if they are single or divorced, they tended to favor it slightly less than people who were married. Next is him working, or at least standing with workers. It's about as nitty gritty as he didn't even roll up his sleeves. So I wanted to see this image in comparison with respondents who were unemployed, or their employment status. So as you can see, if people were did not have employment, they tended to favor it a little bit more. It shows they can relate to people who are in those working class families and working class positions. Next is the puppy picture. I mainly threw this in just because I love the picture of that dog. But I wanted to see how people who have children or do not have children favor this image. So just slightly, people who have children tended to favor it more than people who did not have children, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if it's just because they tend to have a little more warmth. They tend to they like that this candidate shows compassion for another human being aside from themselves. And so I thought that was very interesting. So why does this matter? This will greatly help candidates understand what types of images of themselves are good to use in advertisements and other means of portrayal. So it's really important to be able to see, whether a certain image is going to penalize certain candidates, whether it's going to be more important or persuasive. It will also help candidates target specific groups in order to appeal to their preferences. And so if there is a particular community that, certain candidates cannot relate to, like Hillary Clinton is having a really hard time relating to certain constituencies and certain types of voters, it would be really important for her to be able to tailor her image as an entire person, not just pictures, but in general, to tailor it to people who she could sway with these types of images. So, thank you. There are a lot more results that I was able to get from this study. I just wanted to give a taste from each of the specific images, because obviously there are a lot of different combinations that you can look at to see different effects based on different demographic backgrounds from people. So there are a lot more results. If you're interested in learning more, definitely just let me know. But I appreciate everyone coming today, so thank you so much, and I can take questions now. Yeah.
I just had a question about how large your sample size was in terms of how many participants took the survey?
Yep.
And how you generated that sample pool? Was it like through was it a random generation? Did you select from one community or people that you knew? Or
Yep, great question. So the sample size was almost 400, and I did it through a service called Mechanical Turk on Amazon. So this gives you a really nice randomization of people, and so it was people I did not know. They were compensated for taking the survey, and it's really nice because you can get a lot of people, so you have a pretty representative sample. Yes?
Gotta ask about the hunting photo. Was he holding the bird wrong or something?
You know, there must have. That's what I'm wondering. I think they secretly just knew he was a Democrat, because I don't know why that really could have happened unless they really think that it was too much of an appeal toward their particular side of the aisle or political persuasion. So it's really interesting. I'm not entirely sure. Any other questions? Yes.
Were there any other surprises that you found?
So far, that's really been the only glaring. Well, actually, the other surprise that I guess I should point out is that the means were all relatively equal. The only image overall that had a pretty low likability was the hunting image. All of the others hovered around a score of about like a 59 to 62 average on the scale. So there actually wasn't a particular image that was greatly favored over another. And so I thought that was actually very interesting. Yes?
I'm just wondering, you said that this was really helpful for candidates that maybe weren't relating as well, and you pointed out Hillary Clinton as one. No pressure, but based on this, do you have any suggestions?
I'm having a meeting with her later. No, I mean, I think that it's really important. So, like I talked about in the theory portion, doing things that are relatable to people. So, for her, since she has kind of been in politics for a very long time, she hasn't driven since 1992, like an actual car. And so I think that you get to a certain point where you can no longer relate to voters very well, or they perceive that you can't relate to them. So if you're shown doing things that are really relatable, then or are things that people do every day, or at least showing that you are making an effort to understand what people are doing every day, I think that goes a long way. So I think her bus tour is, a really nice step for her to at least, she's going to Chipotle, she's doing everything normal people do, aside from being totally normal. So I think that, that is very important and can really help. Yes.
It seems like this kind of research hasn't really been done by anybody. I mean, just from talking to you previously, like, why do you think that is? Why do you think no one's conducted a survey like this and like tried to tease out kind of the finer details of likability?
I think a lot of the reason is because campaign strategists, campaign managers really just go off of what's been effective in the past. So it's more of a trial and error as opposed to something that's been focused on in academia. So there are these basic characteristics that are looked at in images kind of in general, so in PR, in advertising, and things like trustworthiness and job proficiency, conscientiousness. So those have all been looked at in the context in a non-political context, but I think that the reason why it just hasn't been focused on in academia as much is because people just go off of what works. So if you work on a campaign and they say, oh, I worked on this other campaign, this really didn't work well, this candidate lost, or something like that, I think that it just kind of goes based on what is the tried and true method for that particular state or that particular person, that particular consulting firm. Yeah. Any other questions? Great, thank you so much, everyone.